Welcome to the Time Management Podcast with me, your host, Abigail Barnes. I'm a productivity coach, global speaker, time management author, and award-winning entrepreneur on a mission to share the 888 formula with the world and to remind you that it's your time. Leave it to me to bring you new time management tips, tricks, tools, and strategies, to introduce you to guests, research, and case studies from around the world, and to give you a simple 5-step process you can follow to uplevel your productivity, achieve your goals, and create a life that exceeds your wildest dreams. I'm so excited that you're here, so let's get started. Welcome to the show. I am so delighted today to be joined by the incredible Caroline Adams Miller. Caroline, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, and it's a delight to see you again.
Tell us who Caroline Adams Miller is in a nutshell.
Caroline Adams Miller is a zestful mom, wife, and expert on positive psychology, grit, and the science of goal setting and how they all intertwine together to help people live flourishing lives.
I am so incredibly excited for this conversation today. Let's start with, what was your relationship like with time growing up?
So I have ADHD that was diagnosed when I was 5. My parents thought it was a stigma, so they threw the medicine away. So I have always operated at 78 RPMs, that old-fashioned term where the record is going way too fast. My relationship with time is not always accurate with what time is. I'm always moving fast, walking fast, talking fast, thinking fast. It can get me in trouble, but I also think it's a superpower. I don't always get time transitions as accurately as I could.
Wow, that's incredible. I love meeting people who are really aware and in tune with their own brains, and the fact that we are starting to now appreciate that every single human being is different and we don't all fit into one neat
Right.
little box.
Can I tell you what I heard this morning that says it beautifully? Ellen Langer is considered the mother of positive psychology. She is an endowed professor at Harvard University, and she rarely gives interviews. But she was giving an interview to Andrew Huberman, and she always calls a man from an audience up who's 6'5" onto a stage, and she has him hold up his hand, and it's huge, and she's 5'2", and she holds her hand up and says, okay, this is why we have to have individual approaches to all kinds of things, because he doesn't look like me, he doesn't have the same size hands as me. And she always makes her point beautifully, which is one size does not fit all, but she does it with a massive man and a tiny woman. I've never heard anybody make the case better than her.
That is such an incredible way to put it. And visually, for us to all be able to see it, it really hammers that point home. Talk to us about how you're using time today and what time freedom actually means to you today. This eternal conversation of work-life balance, where are you at with that one?
I do believe, as a busy professional woman, that I need to outsource more things and stop trying to do them myself. I think I would run out of time the more I tried to be all things to all people and kind of overuse this superpower of hyperactivity. So my relationship with time is, it's finite. We're not here for very long. And I need to maximize the use of every minute I have to carry out my message, my ikigai, my purpose. And to do that, I've surrounded myself with a lot of high quality people, and it's a lot of women actually, when I think about it, to help me do what I'm here to do. So time is valuable. Make the best use of it by not doing things, not because you can do them, but maybe you shouldn't do them.
In life, I think that lots of people have this goal or aspiration to write a book, and you are what they call a prolific writer. You have written several books, and your most recent book out right now is called Big Goals. Who did you write this book for?
I wrote this book for anyone who has a dream. And I do believe that we have not had access to the science from academia that would allow us to set, pursue, and achieve our goals with optimal strategies, because academia is where a lot of the best research on how to motivate, inspire, carry things out, create the right mindset, maximize your chances of success. And I think too many of us have dreams, but we haven't had the right tools to accomplish them. So I think there's a lot of anxiety and depression and frustration, and this one-click approach from Amazon where everybody gets what they want right away, I think it created so much frustration with people waiting for anything that they want that I think it's the perfect kind of storm of us needing to step back and say, how are we going to achieve our dreams and do it with grit and persistence and passion and purpose, and learn that we can't get great things all at once, even if we want them, because the world rewards people who work very hard and take their time doing hard things. It doesn't reward people who do quick fix things.
This conversation could be twice as long as it's going to be. So I'm going to preface it by recommending that people pick up a copy of your book because it covers so many areas, but there's a few that I'd like to talk about today. The first being the goal setting theory. What is it?
Goal setting theory is Edwin Locke and Gary Latham's very careful decades of scholarship on how to actually set goals correctly. And it was published in 1990. So goal setting theory was published in 1990 as an open theory, but it has had thousands of replications with no crises and no challenges. And what it says is goals are divided into two buckets. Performance goals, which I will now call checklist goals because the word performance is confusing. Checklist goals, things you've done before like a recipe, fits onto a checklist. And then learning goals, things you haven't done before that you must acquire skills and knowledge in order to make progress or achieve that goal. So if you mix them up, you get the biggest business disasters in history, like the Boeing MCAS system, the 737's Boeing MCAS. So when you rush results in something you haven't taken the time to learn, you often get into deep trouble. And so Locke and Latham said, get it right from the outset, checklist goals and learning goals. And so I really want the world to understand that this theory is ranked number one of 73 theories in industrial organizational psychology, number one of 73 theories, and yet most people do not know it. And it's not at the cornerstone of most CRM and productivity dashboards that are embedded in companies all over the world. And that's not serving any of us well.
And why do you think it is that most people don't know about it?
I think because in 1981, a man named George Doran wrote an article for a management theory journal on what he called SMART goals. And it was sticky. And he just was, a consultant going to do a gig, and it was sticky, and people remember it very easily. The problem is it's not scientific. Locke and Latham didn't seek publicity. They didn't have podcasts. They didn't have shows. They're not standing on stages. They just did decades of amazing scholarship. And when you are not a squeaky wheel, you don't get the grease and you don't get seen. So goal setting has been taken over by influencers and a lot of men, quite honestly, who stand on stages and have formulas and 7 ways to do this and 5 ways to do that. And the fact of the matter is, when you chase down what's in all of those books, 7 Habits, Tony Robbins, Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, they're all filled with urban legends and no science. And so the whole field has been hijacked by people thinking, well, it can't be that hard. Why would there need to be a science? So I think Locke and Latham got left in the rearview mirror, and I'm determined after reading the theory in 2005 to make sure that if you have a dream, you at least start with the tool of goal setting theory. It's that fundamental and that important.
One of my favorite chapters in the book was chapter 3, where you talked about the science-based secret. Can you tell us more about what that is?
I'm playing on The Secret, which was the big Rhonda Byrne kind of 20th century law of attraction stuff. I bought into that when it came out. I didn't know there was anything else. And so playing on that, because it's not science and it's certainly not what we should be doing, is saying if I want it, I can have it and I'll just think about it harder and harder. I'm referring to what we just talked about. It's a secret. It seems to be a secret. The goal setting theory is this well thought of. It's this respected. It's ranked this high. It's had no replication crises like so many other pieces of research that are so famous. And yet it remains unknown. And so that's why it's a secret. I call it the 800-pound gorilla, because when people study it, they go, this is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It's that big and it's that important and it's that powerful. And yet if it's that big and that powerful and that huge and it's a gorilla, why did I meet it for the first time in October of 2005 when I went back to school to get a master's degree? And I thought I was an expert on goal setting. As an executive coach, I'd been trained in goal setting. It was part of my competencies. I was tested on it. I thought I knew goal setting. The fact of the matter is, I think so many people are like me. We just would never had the privilege of being introduced to it. But once you've been introduced to it, it's on you to use it.
In the book, you're talking about time, motion, and Taylorism. Tell us more about that.
So in 1881, this young man sat in the Midvale steel factory, and he sat there with a little piece of paper, and he just studied worker after worker after worker. And he just made note of what they were doing and whether or not they were wasting motions. Were their hands going in the wrong direction? Were they standing up when they could be sitting down? Time and motion studies were the science at that point. And it caught on, but the problem is there were holes in time and motion studies, which meant Henry Ford came along and said, just redo the factory floor to make the Model T. And then it went to management by objectives with Peter Drucker. And then it went to Intel's Andy Grove and OKRs and KPIs. I mean, it's just been kind of moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic since 1881. But it started with time and motion studies, which a lot of people still think is at the heart of productivity, when in fact it's so much more nuanced than that.
If we didn't have time to read your incredible book, what would we be missing out on understanding?
So many things. I am thrilled it's on Blinkist. I'm thrilled that there are places that have turned it into synopses. But what I want people to understand is that we got here to the 21st century by continuing to just iterate a little bit on those time and motion studies, and that it's a real field. The science of goal setting is a real field. So I build from there to where we are today. It's important that people have an understanding of how we got here. And then also be missing out on the fact that I feel like we're in a period that is identical to the period right after the bubonic plague and the Renaissance, when everything had to be reinvented, everything had to be new again, but it all became evidence-based. I'm reading Leonardo da Vinci's biography by Walter Isaacson right now. It's just so fascinating how art became a mixture of science and geometry and all kinds of things. What I'm saying is, if you read the book, what you're going to see is that we have to have an evidence-based approach to goal setting because it's never been disrupted. It's never been challenged. Nobody pushes back. Everybody just adopts OKRs and KPIs. That's one thing. The second thing you'll miss is that I've spent 20 years pulling together all of the research on the ancillary things that matter, not just if you're setting a goal, but how do you achieve a goal? So I pulled together all of the research on things like mindset and grit and resilience and self-regulation and passion and, all the things that you need to know in order to craft a strategy. And that includes decision making, game theory, etc. And so what I've built is what I think is a rocket ship. Goal setting theory is the engine, and the bridge theory is the rocket fuel, or vice versa, however you want to look at a rocket ship taking off. But the two go together. You can't have one without the other. And then the last thing I'll say, Abigail, is I think it's really important to know that we are just now asking the research very different questions. We're prompting it with different questions like AI does for everything. And we're finding that what works for men does not always work for women. And we have to stop assuming that if we listen to dude podcasts where we hear men talking to men about men and special forces and presidents and CEOs and all the rest of it, and we never as women hear relatable role models, people we can relate to. Self-efficacy theory says you have to have relatable role models, which means that's the muscle of, I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to figure it out. If we stop just seeing that as the one-size-fits-all approach to goal setting and say, does it work for people who look like me? Does it work for women? I think then we're going to come up with very different answers. In fact, the book has addressed that question head on, because there's too many situations in which we now know if women do exactly what men do to succeed, we will not succeed. And that is a big conversation that really deserves an entire hour of its own.
I would love you to come back for that conversation. But let's focus on your incredible book today. So you've mentioned the OKRs, and we've also got the SMART goal setting theory. And then you have created something called the bridge theory. Tell us more about that, and why does it actually matter?
If I just take OKRs, they're very well known and publicized. As I said, it came up with Andy Grove and Intel, who reiterated management by objectives by Peter Drucker. And it was just, data analysis. And it started in Silicon Valley, and it didn't quite fit other situations where there's softer skills. And what I have done, I think I just mentioned some of it a moment ago, is I have brought together in the bridge methodology 6 steps that you really have to look at and answer the prompts in the book and look at how are you brainstorming? Are you brainstorming correctly, whether it's a learning goal or a checklist goal? The number one question I found that people have to ask themselves is, what's new? What's new in the world? What's new out there that I can use to become more efficient and effective? And AI is the number one thing I keep coming up with. And that's how we're reading the Herculaneum scrolls, this incredible puzzle that's existed for 1,000 years. Nobody has known, almost 2,000, nobody has known how to read the Vesuvius scrolls that were covered in ash when Vesuvius erupted. So, I mean, it's solving that. So what's new? Second is relationships. We know that from positive psychology, we need to be surrounded by people who are positive in our lives, who create positive emotions, because we know that happiness precedes success. Flourishing precedes success, and people are the number one way to flourish. So we have to know, who do we want in our lives as we're pursuing goals, and who do we not want? That's equally important. We have to put a boundary around all of the negative people, and I can give you the number one Rorschach test to tell you who the negative people are. And then we have to look at investments of time, energy, and money. Those have to be classified and categorized and planned for, just like James Prochaska's Stages of Change research, where he talked about preparation. You can't skip these steps. Then you go into decision making. When are you going to start pursuing the goal? When are you going to pivot? What are your quit criteria? You know, you don't want to have stupid grit, because G is good grit, but you don't want to have stupid grit and be heading up a mountain in an avalanche or a whiteout and not turn around. So you've got to have quit criteria. Then you have to have good grit, passion, persistence, purpose, good mindset. And then you have to have excellence. What are your standards of excellence that you're shooting for? And the last thing I'll say about excellence, Locke and Latham found that the best outcomes, bar none, for either kind of goal were what's called challenging and specific, which means it's not easy, which means it's not mediocre, which means it's not, if you reach your hand out and you pull the apple off the apple tree, it's that easy. It's challenging and specific. That's when you struggle more, you struggle well to get to your goals, but you end up having more pride in your accomplishments because it's challenging, but it must be specific. So that's my bridge methodology.
And how do you think your approach to goal setting can help the listeners to create the results that they want in their career, their business, or their life right now?
I think anyone who's listening to us already now understands that not all goals are created equal, and that you have to just forget SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, or realistic, whatever. There are 55 definitions of SMART, which is why it's called jargon mishmash syndrome. It means nothing. But at least at this point, if you're listening, goal setting theory, divide it first into a learning goal. Have I ever done it before? Where am I going to acquire the skills and knowledge? Checklist goal. Have I done it before? Can I fit the steps on a recipe card, essentially, and even teach it to somebody else? But both be looking at, how do I become most effective? So that's number one. Number two is the bridge methodology will make you pause and create a strategy. Because too many people plunge into action because they think, well, you know, I'll just go do it. I mean, I'll just copy that person, or I heard that influencer on that podcast, or saw that person on TV, or People Magazine had a story about someone who lost a lot of weight. I'll see what they did. You really have to think through the strategy of how to do it. So that's where I think the book is incredibly valuable and really pioneering.
You mentioned just now how we can identify the negative people in our lives. Can you give us a hint as to the best way to do that?
Yes. Shelley Gable at the University of California, Santa Barbara, is this brilliant, brilliant researcher. And she has a piece of research called What Happens Between People When Things Go Right, which is so provocative in and of itself. And what she found is that when you have a piece of good news or a success and you put it out there, you share it with somebody, there's only one right way to respond, and that response tells you if somebody has your back. It tells you that that person wants you to succeed. What is that response? Curiosity and enthusiasm. Wow, that's great. You got that book contract, or you got that speech, or you got that promotion, or you're changing jobs, or you're pregnant, whatever. Curiosity and enthusiasm tells you that that person really, really wants you to be successful and wants to hear as much about it as you want to share. There are three other ways to respond: passive destructive, passive constructive, and active destructive. And all of these involve changing the conversation so that you're not talking about it, being actively cruel and demeaning, or any variety of that. All you have to remember for this conversation is there's one Rorschach test. So pick a piece of fake good news, and it's like a smoke detector. Look up, hit the red button, and put that fake news out there. Watch how people respond. And when you notice that some of those people are mothers, sisters, sisters-in-law, best friends, etc., do not be surprised, because it's going to be them too. And we have to stop sharing our good news and our successes with people who should be happy for us, but who actually are not. Do not be asleep at the wheel in your life. Time is important. Going back to the whole importance of your podcast, time is ticking. Memento mori. We're dying at every moment of every day. Do not waste your time being around people simply because they're friends, but they may be frenemies, friends who are enemies. So it's really important that we keep ourselves in the right groups as much as possible of people who support us, and that we put boundaries around the people who are not. And we now have that tool that tells us whether or not they are supporters of ours.
Such an incredible top tip. Thank you for sharing. And I really feel like that is an amazing time-saving tip as well, because it can be so difficult to keep your own head in the game sometimes. And then when you're sharing the news with people and the response isn't what you were expecting, or isn't how you would respond to other people's good news, then it can be very confusing.
Well, I want to add one thing to that, because it is that important. Shelley Gable also found that the first person you share your good news with, that person's response, if it's not this active, constructive responding, can make you abandon your goal. You may code it as unimportant. It's that important. So the first responder research is what I call it. And you really have to be thoughtful about not just who you share your dreams with, but the first person. That first person has outsized influence on whether or not you think the goal's a good idea, or whether or not you're going to stick with it.
Something you wrote in the book that really made me think, and I can't wait to ask you this question, is, are vision boards dangerous fantasies?
Okay. Well, yes and no. One of the things we know from research by Gabriel Ottingen is that when you spend too much time in what's called positive fantasies, you have this fantasy that you're standing at the top of the platform with the gold medal around your neck. You're at the finish line of something that you've worked really hard to attain. When you spend too much time fantasizing about how great it'll be when you've done that hard thing, you begin to believe that you've done more work than you actually have. So you can delude yourself into thinking that you're making progress when in fact you're not. Now, when are vision boards useful is when you don't dwell on them too much, but when they prime you to think goal-directed thoughts. Lock and Latham updated goal-setting theory in 2013 by adding the impact of goals that are primed in your subconscious. What does that mean? When you have well-set goals, you may not be pursuing one of them at a certain time. You may be pursuing another one that's important to you. But if you've set a goal and there's a prime in your environment, an aroma, a picture, a person, a television show that tweaks you subconsciously, like, I have a goal to do that thing too, or that's a piece of knowledge I should integrate into my strategy. What they found is that you make progress on both the conscious goal and the subconscious goal. And that's where vision boards are very useful.
How do you think COVID-19, the pandemic, has changed our collective need to learn how to set goals in a new and different way?
I was alluding to this a little bit earlier. I think that we're in a period that's just identical to the post-bubonic plague Black Death period in the Middle Ages, when a third of Europe died, a lot of Asia died, and they had to come up with new ways to bury people, new banking system, new social classes, you name it. Everything was new. Art was new, science was new, physics was new, medicine was new, education was new. And that's what gave birth to the Renaissance. Things had to be new. We're in a similar situation now, because things we did 5 years ago are probably not working anymore. And we need to have new ways to actually do most things in our lives, from buying things to mailing a letter. It's just not the same anymore. Buying groceries. It was time for goal setting to be disrupted and for it to be brought into an evidence-based approach. I am sick and tired of zombie approaches that are walking among us. They're dead theories that do not have science in them, but they're still walking among us. SMART goals is one of them. And it's time we killed them off and turned, like we did in the Renaissance, to what's evidence-based and where's the proof. And that's what I'm seeking to do.
You mentioned in your book, and you've talked about it already on this conversation today, about the Huberman Lab podcast. What protocols have you adopted and adapted as a result of listening to this podcast? I'm curious to know.
Andrew Huberman, for people who don't know Andrew Huberman, this podcast emerged out of the starting gate. And I think 2021, it went from 0 listeners to millions. Because what he did as a professor of ophthalmology at Stanford University is he said there's way too much data and knowledge here in academia, here in the medical world, that is not reaching consumers. But it's robust enough that I feel like I need to let people know what that research says. And so what he has told people to do is create protocols around your health, your well-being, even goal setting he's talked about. One of the protocols that I've changed is the importance of getting outside for 5 minutes early in the morning and exposing your eyes to the sun, to the horizon, to reset your sleep and biological clocks. I do that now. And I do it again at the end of the day because too often we have blue screens coming at us. But there are a number of things I've changed. I also take certain supplements now that I never would have taken before. What Huberman did, though, is he gave the power to the listeners. And he said, here's the research. Here's what best practices look like. But experiment and see what works for you. And that's exactly what I've done with goal setting. And it just needed to be said and done.
Let's continue this conversation about you. Tell us something that you do with your time on a daily basis that you don't think that other people do with their time.
Wow, that's interesting. I'm very, very, very clear. I have no fuzzy goals. If it's about creating a course, I have a deadline and I pull in the right experts to help me accomplish it. And I have steps. If you want to call them KPIs or steps along the way, I'm very, very clear. There's nothing fuzzy in my life when it comes to my goals. The second is I do hard things. And I think everyone should do hard things because at the end of the day, we all scan our days for what we did that we're proud of that day. We don't know we're doing it. It's a subconscious thing that we do, but we all do it. And the things we're proud of that build our self-confidence, that allow us to do harder things, are the things we did outside of our comfort zone. And so I think I do hard things on a daily basis. Third thing is I'm very open to feedback from other people who are smarter than I am. And I always bring in dissenting voices. I'm very open to learning from people. And I think you have to drop any arrogance or fear you have that you're being judged for not being smart enough and just say, where are the experts and where can I find those people and that knowledge? Because we know that grit has humility in it. And it has two kinds of humility built into it, social humility and intellectual humility. You have to know that it's okay to not be the smartest person in the room and be okay with the spotlight being on other people. And secondly, you have to be very comfortable not knowing everything and being in the presence of people who have that knowledge and not feeling diminished by those people. And I'm going to say one more thing I do. I uplift other women. I make sure that when I see another woman who has succeeded, or who has a big idea, or if she's interrupted in a meeting I'm in, I make sure that we get back to whatever that person was saying and let her finish, because we know that that is an insult in people's brains, in women's brains, when they're disrupted and they can't finish their thoughts. That's a wound. And I want other women to succeed because I do believe a rising tide lifts all boats. And I'm not a believer that if she got a piece of pie, I will not get a piece of pie. I think if she got a piece of pie, there's another pie out there and I'm going to get a piece of pie too, but we all need to support each other. And I don't think that comes easily to most women because we don't see it very often in society. We don't see it role modeled. We don't see it very often in films and shows. What we see are mean girls.
So much airtime is given to the morning routine. I'd love to know what your evening routine is, because I truly believe that how we go to bed and set our subconscious mind up for the night is the super fuel for the successful morning. So what is your evening routine like?
I always have a workout, and if I didn't get it in the morning, I get it at night. Not too close to bedtime, but I do enough to exhaust my quad muscles because I know that helps me to sleep well. I check my Oura Ring to make sure it's fully charged so that I am wearing it at night so that when I wake up, the first thing I do is I check to see the quality of my sleep. So that's important. I've learned to power down earlier and earlier, and I refuse to have any conversations with anybody, any emails, anything that could disrupt my tranquility. And I close down by reading books that make me feel awestruck. So when I go to sleep, I usually feel awestruck. Right now, it's 2 books. I'm reading Leonardo da Vinci's biography, which it just awes me. It awes everybody. Just awestruck on every page, and it's a big book. And the second thing is I'm listening to a book, Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, about how Lincoln assembled with humility a cabinet of people who didn't all agree with him. But that's how my country transformed itself at a pivotal moment. And I feel like I can be inspired and awed before I go to bed. And I think I wake up feeling different because of that.
I love this so much. And you mentioned that you do exercise every day. When it comes to exercising, what are your top tips to make sure that you actually stick to that commitment and you do it?
I am always accountable to a swim team. I pay for my swim team. People know I'm coming. You know, my brother's on the same team. So there's a certain amount of accountability I have to the people around me who expect me to be in their lane in the morning. Or if I get an email and say, are you going to be there tomorrow at 5:30? Yeah, I'll be there. Well, I got to show up. So I'm accountable. The second thing is I've been paying the same trainer for 30 years to lift weights. I'm a big believer that women need to be strong physically. Too often women neglect the importance of being strong women. So I have been lifting weights and actually getting stronger since my early 20s. And I also do the martial arts. And I think it's really important to have situational awareness in terms of not just being strong, but being able to deploy that strength in the right ways at the right time for yourself or on behalf of somebody else. And I do a few things alone, but for the most part, my fitness routine involves being accountable to other people and paying for the privilege of that accountability as well.
These are such incredible top tips. I'd also add to it my own personal ones is that I make a decision, usually the day before, about what I'm going to do the next day. And the night before, I will always put my kit out for whatever it is that I'm going to do the next day so that it's just done. There is no question, what am I going to wear? I just get up, I do it, it's done. And it's part of who I am. It's not a drama.
Just one thing, because I think we don't want to get into initiating the new behavior every day or every other day, these habits. Like, what are we going to do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday? Are we going to go to the same place at the same time? That way I don't worry so much if I have my swim bag in the car. It's always there. And my subconscious and my conscious knows there's certain days where I'm going to be at a pool. So those have become so built in, and I have everything always ready. Also, my suitcases are always prepared. I always have a bathing suit. I always have resistance bands in my suitcase. But I think that once you have the habit, you don't have to initiate that new thinking, like, what am I going to wear? It's just always there.
And this feeds back into what you were saying earlier about the importance of your environment. So when you're setting your environment up for success, everything that you need is always to hand. It's always there. Then there is one less excuse.
Yeah. And you know, something my husband and I just realized very recently, and I think this is appropriate right here, is we have 3 adult children and they're all very fit. And they all take time to do whatever it is they do. Peloton, Pilates, swimming. My oldest son runs 10 miles a day. And we look around at some of our friends' children who did not grow up seeing their parents prioritize fitness or health. And their children, as a consequence, are not as healthy as they should be given their ages. And it was only very recently we just kind of woke up and said one day, do you realize how fit our 3 adult children are? And how different this is from what our friends say their children are doing? I didn't realize, it wasn't an intention. I wasn't trying to change my children's lives by prioritizing this. I think I had this very serious eating disorder. I almost died from bulimia in my early 20s. And I just knew as I saved my own life that the habits I put into place in my 20s that included being strong and being fit without being overly committed to it to the point where it was a way to lose weight, was how I wanted to live. What I didn't realize was the legacy impact that we would have on our children. And that's been an eye-opener very recently for us to discuss.
It's such an incredible realization, especially when it comes to conversations about leadership. We don't lead by what we tell people to do. We lead by what we show people we're doing.
Right.
What is one question you haven't been asked that you would like to have been asked?
What is the big goal that I have?
What is the big goal that you have?
The big goal I have is for the world, and particularly our youth, to have access to the science of goal setting, because I think we're coming off a generation of everyone was a winner and all must have prizes and comfort animals and dumbed down playgrounds. And I really do believe that if we give our next generation the benefit of goal setting theory and the bridge methodology, will have less anxiety, less depression, and fewer suicides, because the future will feel like it's in their hands, that they can do something about it without feeling overwhelmed. And of course, I want the world to have access to this, because even artificial intelligence shows up with SMART goals. If you ask it a question of goal setting, it's so embedded in our culture, these lack of scientific models, these zombie models. My dream is for that to change. And if I can lead the way, fantastic.
That is an incredible goal, and I am reinforcing that one. I would love, love, love to see this in universities, education around the world.
Right. Here we go.
When it comes to time, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Don't waste time worrying what other people think. Period. Exclamation point, exclamation point. I think as a woman, biosocial theory says we grow up being culturally imprinted with being nice and communal and not ambitious and not goal-directed and blah, blah, blah. And as a result, I think a lot of us hide our lights under a bushel, and we're afraid to be proud of ourselves. And I can say honestly that since everything I do, it is evidence-based. I'm surrounded by binders of research on this. In the last 100 years, the one area where women have made no progress is in being agentic. We're allowed to be seen as competent. We're allowed to be seen as likable or warm or communal. We are not allowed to be seen as agentic without paying a penalty from both men and women. And if I had just stopped worrying about that so much earlier in life, I think I would probably have done, maybe would have written 18 books and not 9. But I got here and I overcame my eating disorder, and I'm in 40 years of long-term recovery. And so something went right, but I do wish I'd gotten rid of all that angst of worrying. But you know what? Here I am today, and I kind of like me.
Something definitely went right. And when I hear somebody say, I kind of like me, then that is also one of those great big ticks in the boxes. As we are wrapping up the conversation, I would love you to speak to somebody in the audience who perhaps needs to step up in their life. What's one step that they could take? What's one thing that they could do that's slightly out of their comfort zone, doesn't blow their nervous system, but will get them some results on their life journey?
Ask yourself what you will regret not pursuing if you're looking back on your life in 10 or 20 years, because we all carry regrets. And it's called counterfactual thinking. And what we don't want to do is age with so many regrets that we become bitter. And so I think it's important to say, what will I not regret pursuing? And then think of one thing you can do. One thing you can do to move a little bit closer to the accomplishment of that goal. And it might be identifying somebody who has your back. That's one big step that you could take on the road to accomplishing a goal you won't regret pursuing.
Caroline has shared so many incredible things on this podcast episode today. It's been like a jumping off point to 7 different other roads that we could have gone down. So please, please, please let us know wherever you're listening to this podcast in the comments below. Drop us an email. Let us know what you're taking away from this and any questions that you have as well about it. As always, we will leave all the links in the show notes for everything, including a link to Caroline, where you can check out her other books. Caroline, where do you hang out online? Where's the best place to find you and connect with you?
LinkedIn, I get a lot of interaction with people. But I have two websites. The book has its own website, biggoalsbook.com, and I have lots of examples of the bridge methodology in action. But then carolinemiller.com has links to Instagram and I guess Facebook. I'd say LinkedIn is probably the place to find me most effectively.
All of the places. And again, all those links are going to be in the show notes. Well, thank you so much for your time. We truly appreciate you coming on and sharing your big goals and bridge theory with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very appreciative for your energy and your audience's energy.
And until next time, my friends, remember, stay safe, stay well, and it is your time. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you loved what you heard, be sure to let me know by leaving a review so I can keep the good stuff coming. Come and say hi on Instagram at Success by Design Training, or visit my website successbydesigntraining.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search Abigail Barnes. Until next time, don't forget, you are amazing and it's your time.